Nick is disinherited. He gets nothing. That's not just a cold legal line buried in some dusty probate document. That's a father's final verdict on his only son. And that father? Rob Reiner, Hollywood icon, household name, a man who made the world laugh, cry, and believe in stories that mattered. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But now, it's his story gripping the world. And it's darker than anyone imagined. Because this wasn't just a death. It was a double homicide. And behind the headlines, beneath the flowers and tributes, was a discovery that stunned detectives, shattered illusions, and left the entertainment industry frozen with one simple, staggering question. Why would a father leave his only son with nothing and warn the world that he couldn't be trusted? Let's rewind for a second. You probably remember where you were when the headlines broke. Rob Reiner and wife found dead in Brentwood home. Son arrested at the scene. At first, it didn't feel real. It couldn't be. Rob Reiner, the man behind When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, Stand By Me, wasn't supposed to be the center of a true crime story, let alone one that ends in blood, betrayal, and a broken family legacy. The Reiners were supposed to be Hollywood's stable force. Quiet, grounded, private, not the next chapter in Los Angeles' darkest tales. But then the details came pouring in, and they weren't just shocking. They were cinematic in the worst possible way. A $13.5 million estate, 2 bodies, dozens of stab wounds, and a son, living 100 feet away. Nick Reiner, 32, Rob's only son, a writer sometimes, a recluse often, and now, a murder suspect. The scene of the crime. It was a Sunday, December 14th. Quiet, overcast skies in Brentwood. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until Romy Reiner arrived at her parents' house, late morning, after they hadn't responded to calls. She had a key. She opened the front door. What she saw would haunt her forever. The foyer was splattered. Blood trailed down the hallway like a grotesque red ribbon. And both her parents were motionless, one on the staircase, the other near the study. Multiple sharp force injuries. Defensive wounds. A struggle. Not quick, not clean, and eerily silent. There had been number 911 call from inside the home. No broken windows. No sign of a forced entry. Police were on the scene within minutes. By the time the sun dipped behind the California hills, yellow tape wrapped around the entire property. And in the backyard, past the pool and garden, a small guest house. Inside was Nick Reiner. Nick's arrest, and his expression. He didn't run. He didn't cry. In fact, when officers entered his guest house and told him why they were there, he reportedly muttered just 3 words. Took them long. According to the police report, he was calm, cold, detached. There were cuts on his arms, bruises on his knuckles, and in the trash, bloodied clothing, tucked beneath empty wine bottles and a crumpled fast food bag. He was arrested that night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But it wasn't until 3 days later that the real bombshell exploded. The hidden will. While conducting a routine search of the main house, one officer noticed a strange panel in Rob's private office, a mahogany wall with a slightly off-kilter hinge. Behind it, a locked fireproof safe. And inside the safe, not cash, not guns, not memorabilia, a sealed envelope marked, "My final will." If Romy or the courts are reading this, then Nick must be stopped. What was written in that document would change everything. A father's last words and final judgment. The will was dated 6 months prior. Witnessed, notarized, legally airtight. It named Romy as the sole heir. Nick, explicitly cut out. Not only that, Rob left a written statement alongside the will, addressed to law enforcement and family attorneys. In it, he wrote, "Nick has a history of violent behavior, paranoia, and manipulation. He cannot be trusted. I fear what he may do to us, to Romy, and to himself. If this will is being read, I'm likely gone. And he should be your first question." Let that sink in. Rob Reiner knew something was coming. He saw the storm on the horizon, and he tried to protect his family from it. But it was too late. The public cracks in a private family. To the outside world, the Reiners were tight-knit. You'd see Rob smiling at premieres, Michelle by his side, Romy posting silly TikToks. Nick? He was the quiet one. The shadow, rarely seen, hardly mentioned. But in industry circles, the whispers had grown over the years. Nick's unpredictable. He's jealous of Romy. He's got issues, serious ones. There was an incident with a producer once. Things got hushed up. And now, those rumors weren't just whispers. They were evidence. What really happened between father and son? The idea of being disinherited by a parent is heartbreaking. But being publicly disinherited, with a statement that paints you as dangerous? That's damning. So what drove Rob to do it? Was there one final straw? A moment when he realized, my son might one day kill me? Or was it a slow unraveling? Years of patterns, threats, explosions, manipulations? Sources close to the family say it was both. One former housekeeper revealed anonymously that in the summer of 2021, Rob and Michelle locked themselves in their bedroom after a confrontation with Nick got violent. Police were never called. No charges were filed. But according to her, that was the day they decided to change the will. But why keep it secret? If Rob feared for his life, if he believed Nick was dangerous, why not speak out sooner? Why not get a restraining order or go public? Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was love. Or maybe it was the eternal hope that things might get better. Because even the best storytellers can't rewrite family pain. Even the greatest directors can't control the ending. And in Rob's case, the ending came anyway. A story Hollywood never expected. We've watched Rob Reiner's stories for decades. He gave us courtroom showdowns, tear-jerking coming-of-age tales, iconic romances, legendary comedies. But nothing could prepare the world for the tragedy playing out now. A father and mother gone. A daughter, traumatized, and a son, sitting in jail, reading the headlines and hearing over and over. You get nothing. But what's even more disturbing is what came after the will was discovered. Because hidden behind that same panel wasn't just one envelope. There were three, each one labeled with a name. To be opened if Nick is arrested. To be opened if Romy is threatened. And one final envelope marked, open this if you truly want to understand what happened. And trust me, that one changes everything. That one changes everything. What was in the final envelope? That's the question investigators, family attorneys, and even Romy herself refused to comment on for days. But as pressure mounted from the media, and as the charges against Nick Reiner were formally announced in court, the contents of that envelope, the one marked, open this if you truly want to understand what happened, were leaked. And what it revealed wasn't just a father's heartbreak. It was a man trying to solve a puzzle no one else could piece together. Not therapists, not lawyers, not even the people closest to Nick. Because according to Rob, his son wasn't just troubled, he was dangerous, and broken in a way no amount of love could fix. The letter that changed everything. The envelope contained a handwritten letter from Rob Reiner, 6 pages long, each word trembling, carefully thought out. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a threat. It was a confession of sorts. Here's an excerpt from the first page. If you're reading this, I failed. I tried everything I could to reach Nick. I fought for him. I forgave him. I excused him. I explained him. But eventually, I realized the person I loved doesn't exist anymore. He's someone else now. And that someone is angry, unpredictable, and possibly violent. I don't say this lightly, but if something happens to me or Michelle, please protect Romy. It's one thing to hear an accusation from a stranger, but from a father? From a man who adored his son since birth? It tears you apart. But Rob wasn't writing out of anger. He was writing out of fear. The breaking point. Somewhere along the way, Rob knew he had to draw a line. The letter details several disturbing incidents from the prior 3 years. Nick allegedly vandalizing Rob's car after being denied money. Threatening voicemails left on Michelle's private line, one of which reportedly said, "You'll regret cutting me off. I'll make sure of it." A moment Rob describes as the worst night of my life. When Nick allegedly locked himself in the main house with a kitchen knife after an argument, the family didn't go public. They didn't file police reports. Why? Because Rob still believed his son could be saved. But Michelle? She wasn't so sure. Rob writes, "Michelle begged me to draw a boundary. I kept defending him. I didn't want to believe he could actually hurt us. But the signs were all there. I was just too blind to see them." The inner war of a father. Let's pause here. Because it's important to realize, Rob Reiner wasn't just a father. He was a public figure. A man who built a career crafting heroes, guiding characters through growth and redemption. How do you reconcile that with the realization that your own child might be the villain of your story? Can you? Would you? Rob tried, over and over. But according to that letter, there came a moment he could no longer ignore reality. It happened one night, when he and Nick were sitting on the back porch. They were drinking tea. It was quiet, calm, almost normal, until Rob told Nick he wouldn't be funding his latest script. Nick didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He simply looked his father in the eye and said, "If I wanted to ruin you, I could." That was the moment. The tipping point. Rob wrote. I felt it. The shift. The look in his eyes. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was contempt. And I knew we were no longer safe. Why did Romy get everything? Because Rob trusted her. That much is clear throughout his writings. He calls her wise beyond her years, our protector, the child who understood what love really meant. And in the will, it's Romy who is named executor. Romy who receives the estate. Romy who is entrusted with the family's legacy. Nick? He isn't just excluded. He's specifically disinherited. Rob goes as far as stating, Nick is to receive no money, no property, no rights to any intellectual or business assets. This is for the safety of those around him, and because I believe financial control will only accelerate his instability. That's not just a legal move. That's a lifeline being severed. And the timing couldn't be more haunting. Just 6 months later, both Rob and Michelle would be dead. So was Nick planning this? That's what prosecutors are asking now. Was this a sudden act of rage? Or something premeditated? Because here's the twist. Rob's will wasn't public. It wasn't even stored with the family attorney. It was hidden in the wall. So how did Nick know? Some suggest he didn't. That the attack was personal, emotional, explosive. But others, including a family friend who spoke anonymously, suggest something more chilling. Nick knew he was being cut out. He knew something was going on. He started making weird comments about paperwork and not being appreciated. At one point, he asked me how long it takes to contest a will if both parents are dead. I didn't think much of it then. But now, I can't sleep. The industry reacts. Hollywood has seen its share of scandals. But this feels different. This wasn't an overdose. It wasn't a PR nightmare or a messy divorce. This was betrayal. Murder. A legacy cracked open and rotting from the inside. Within 24 hours of the news breaking, tributes poured in. Tom Hanks called Rob a beacon of story and soul. Sally Field described Michelle as the quiet genius who grounded the storm. Morgan Freeman wrote, "They were light in a place full of shadows." I'm heartbroken. But Nick? Silence. Former collaborators distanced themselves. Old friends deleted photos. And not a single public statement came from anyone once close to him. What comes next? Nick is being held without bail. His legal team says he's innocent. That he was asleep when it happened. That the evidence is circumstantial. But with the discovery of the will, the diary, which we'll get to soon, and the sealed letters, it's not just a legal battle now. It's a war for the truth. And Romy? She hasn't spoken publicly since the funeral. But close sources say she's shaken, terrified. And not just because of what happened, but because of what might still come next. Because there's one final question lingering over this entire tragedy. A question Rob hinted at, but never fully answered. What if Nick wasn't acting alone? And that brings us to the beginning. The hidden safe. The sealed will. The brutal double homicide. The son who inherited nothing. What seemed like an isolated tragedy might actually be the beginning of something much bigger. And if what investigators suspect is true, then the story we thought ended in Brentwood has only just begun. Who finds their parents' bodies and immediately knows who's responsible? That was the question investigators whispered among themselves as they took Romy Reiner's statement, her voice shaking, her hands trembling, but her words eerily precise. Because when Romy unlocked that front door on Sunday morning, December 14th, she didn't just find a crime scene. She walked into a nightmare that had been waiting to happen. The question wasn't if someone had done this. It was who. And Romy didn't hesitate. She looked the officers dead in the eye and said, "Check the guest house. He's still here." The calm before the horror. It was just after 10:30 a.m. when Romy arrived at the Reiner estate. She'd been trying to call her parents all morning. No answer. Odd, but not alarming. Until she texted the house manager, who said he hadn't seen or heard from either of them since the night before. That's when the unease crept in. Romy had a key. She'd used it countless times. She'd grown up in that house. But that morning, something felt off. The front door was locked, which wasn't unusual. But the air inside, the moment she stepped in, felt heavy, thick, like the house was holding its breath. And then she saw it. The foyer. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to stop her cold. A smear on the wall. A trail leading toward the back hallway. And silence. No footsteps. No voices. No TV. Just the low hum of the AC and the distant chirp of birds outside. She screamed once, "Mom? Dad?" But no answer came. The discovery. The hallway to Rob's study had always been filled with family photos. Vacations. Movie premieres. Christmas mornings. But that day, it was stained with something else. Panic. Michelle was the first one Romy found. Face down. One arm extended. A pool of blood beneath her head. Romy didn't remember dropping her phone. Didn't remember collapsing to her knees. But the neighbors heard the scream. A single, guttural, human sound no one ever forgets. By the time Romy stumbled toward the staircase, she found her father. Rob. Still. His eyes open. One hand on the banister. His body crumpled like he'd been trying to escape or stop someone. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. She ran outside. Screamed for help. Called 911. And by 10:52 a.m., LAPD cruisers swarmed the estate. What came next was chaos wrapped in protocol. First responders at the scene. Body cam footage hasn't been released to the public, not yet. But insiders describe what they saw as one of the most disturbing domestic crime scenes in Brentwood history. Blood spatter analysis suggested multiple stabbings. Michelle was attacked first, according to early forensic evidence. Likely in the study, Rob appeared to have heard the struggle, rushed in, and was then stabbed near the base of the stairs. Multiple wounds. Sharp force injuries. Blunt force trauma to the back of the head. No gunshots. No forced entry. No broken locks. Which meant one thing. They knew their killer. The guest house. Every Hollywood estate has one. Some call it a pool house. Others a writer's nook. A retreat. But in the Reiner residence, the guest house had become Nick's kingdom. And when officers made their way back there, guns drawn, flashlights ready, they didn't know what to expect. What they found. Nick Reiner. 32, calm. Quiet. Sitting on a couch. Watching a muted TV. He looked up when the door opened. Didn't flinch. Didn't ask why they were there. He just stared. "Officer, we need you to come with us." "Nick, they're dead, right?" The pause was long enough to fill the room with dread. "Officer, stand up. Hands where we can see them." "Nick, took you long enough." What was in the guest house? According to the official police report, the following items were found in and around Nick's living space. A bloodied hoodie, shoved beneath the bed. A pair of Nike sneakers with what appeared to be dried blood on the soles. 3 handwritten pages of what investigators called a disturbing monologue or inner script. A bottle of antipsychotic medication, unopened. A kitchen knife, missing from the main house's drawer set. And a hand mirror shattered. In the bathroom sink? Flesh. Possibly skin. Later confirmed as consistent with a defensive wound on Rob's hand. But what chilled officers the most was the silence. There were no signs of a struggle in the guest house. No broken furniture. No forced retreat. Nick was just waiting. Who was Nick waiting for? Some believe he was waiting for police. Others believe he was waiting for Romy. To talk? To threaten? To hurt? We don't know. But the letter found beside his bed suggests something deeply sinister. Written in jagged script, barely legible in parts, it read, "He thinks he owns me. She just smiles and follows. I'm the one in the shadows." But shadows don't stay still forever. Let them understand what silence can do. And at the bottom, it ends tonight. The knife. There were no fingerprints on the blade. It had been wiped. Cleaned. But missed one thing. A tiny smudge of blood in the screw of the handle. DNA confirmed. Rob's blood. Nick claimed he'd never seen the knife. Said it wasn't his. That he hadn't left the guest house that night. But surveillance told a different story. Security footage and timeline. The Reiner estate had a full security system. Cameras on every corner. But oddly, not inside the guest house. At 2:12 a.m., Nick is seen leaving the guest house barefoot. At 2:14 a.m., the motion light near the kitchen flickers on. At 2:17 a.m., movement is detected near the study. Then silence. At 4:12 a.m., Nick returns to the guest house. Carrying something. What exactly? Unclear. The footage is grainy. Dim. But prosecutors say the timeline is devastatingly clear. Nick was at the scene. He had motive. He had access. And now, a legacy was broken forever. Romy's statement. Police asked her one final question that morning. Why did you tell us to check the guest house? Her answer? Because he told me one day they'd get what they deserved. And I believed him. But even that wasn't the whole story. Because in the days that followed, new evidence surfaced. A diary, a voicemail, and a list of names, circled, crossed out, highlighted in red ink. At the top, Dad. What did it mean? Why were there dates written beside each name? And why was Romy's name there too, with a question mark? What came next was even worse. The murders were just the beginning. The deeper investigators dug into Nick's past and his obsession with being seen, the more disturbing the truth became. Because while everyone assumed this was about money, inheritance, or family feuds, they were wrong. It was about control, recognition, power. And the next revelation? It would turn the entire case inside out. Because someone else knew what was coming. And they tried to warn Rob. But he never listened. What if you spent your whole life living in someone else's spotlight and finally snapped? That's the question many are now asking about Nick Reiner. To the outside world, Nick was a mystery, barely photographed, rarely mentioned in interviews, and almost never seen on red carpets. But behind the gates of the Reiner estate, Nick wasn't just the son of a Hollywood legend. He was a storm waiting to happen. And from what we know now, his darkness didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for years, long before the murders, long before the will, and long before the final words were written in blood. A childhood wrapped in fame and distance. Born in 1992, Nick Reiner was the only son of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer. From the beginning, the world expected something from him. How could they not? His father was an icon, the director of The Princess Bride, Misery, A Few Good Men, Stand By Me. His mother, Michelle, a powerful yet soft-spoken figure in the industry, known for her intelligence and poise. And then there was Nick, the baby in the background. Rarely seen, almost never heard. Family friends say that even as a child, Nick was moody, sensitive, and easily overwhelmed. He reportedly struggled in school, had difficulty forming friendships, felt, according to one childhood friend, like he was born in the wrong story. Rob, meanwhile, was everywhere, directing hits, winning awards, giving speeches, appearing on panels. Michelle kept the home front together. Romy, born a few years later, was the golden child, charming, funny, witty, and beloved. And Nick? Nick was the shadow, the early warnings. By age 10, Nick had been expelled from 2 schools. One for threatening a teacher, another for reportedly choking another student during recess. Nothing made the papers. The Reiners had powerful friends, friends who made sure stories stayed buried. But the damage at home was harder to cover. Insiders claim Rob and Michelle tried everything. Private tutors, behavioral specialists, therapy, residential summer programs. But nothing stuck. Nick's mood swings became more violent. He reportedly punched a window at 13 after being told he couldn't attend a red carpet event with his father. By 15, he was diagnosed with intermittent explosive disorder and major depressive disorder. Writing as a weapon. By his late teens, Nick discovered writing, and at first, it seemed like a breakthrough. He started working on scripts. Dark, edgy, uncomfortable stories. One source close to the family said, "It was the first time we saw him focused. He wasn't happy, but he was alive." But then came the disturbing part. Nick's scripts weren't fiction. Not really. They were about a boy ignored by his famous father. A sister who got all the attention. A house of lies. A murder. Always a murder. In one script titled Patriarch, the main character poisons his father and frames his sister. The script was never sold, but copies exist. And now, with the real-life events, it reads less like fiction and more like premeditation. The first public breakdown. In 2015, Nick had what insiders call his first full meltdown. It happened after Rob publicly praised Romy at an industry event, calling her "my greatest joy." Nick wasn't even mentioned. That night, he reportedly showed up at the family home uninvited. Drunk, angry, screaming. Michelle called a friend instead of the police. Nick was driven back to his apartment. But that same week, he posted a cryptic message on a now-deleted Twitter account. "When you're erased long enough, you start writing your own ending." That post went unnoticed. But Romy screenshotted it. And she kept it. Years later, It would become part of her sworn affidavit to police. Rehab, relapse, and rage. In 2016, Nick entered a luxury rehab center in Malibu. It was part of a deal. If he completed the program, Rob would fund his next short film. Nick stayed 3 weeks, then checked himself out. 6 months later, he was back. This time after being found passed out in a studio parking lot. Friends say he resented rehab, said it was for weaklings, claimed he didn't have a problem. The world did. A former roommate revealed that Nick once said, "They want me medicated because I see the truth. They want me silent because my words are louder than their lies." Eventually, Rob cut off all film funding. And that's when things got truly dark. Letters never sent, but never deleted. Investigators later uncovered a folder on Nick's laptop labeled Dad. Inside, over 60 unsent letters. Dated, emotional, angry, poetic, disturbing. Some read like desperate pleas. "Why don't you love me?" Others were cold. "One day, you'll choke on your own silence." One, dated just 2 weeks before the murders, read, "They think I'm the problem. But when they're gone, the world will finally see." Let that sink in. When they're gone. That's not grief. That's planning. Romy and Nick. A sibling story torn apart. Perhaps the most complicated relationship in Nick's life was with his sister, Romy. They were only 5 years apart, but might as well have lived on different planets. Romy was social, outgoing, openly adored by Rob and Michelle. Nick wasn't. Sources say Nick often accused Romy of stealing their parents. Once, during a family vacation, he allegedly pushed her into a pool during an argument, fully clothed, mid-dinner. Michelle reportedly tried to intervene. Nick screamed, "She doesn't get to take everything from me." Years later, Romy would tell police, "I love my brother, but I was afraid of him. And I think deep down, so were they." The final years before the murders. From 2020 to 2024, Nick lived almost entirely in the guest house. He had no known job, no confirmed income. Rob reportedly paid for his food and utilities, but nothing else. Nick rarely left the property. He didn't attend family dinners, didn't respond to texts, didn't even speak to Rob face to face. Everything went through Michelle. He became, in essence, a ghost haunting the edge of their lives. And then, in June of 2025, everything changed. That was the month Rob changed the will. No one told Nick, but somehow he knew. He grew more erratic, unstable, aggressive. Romy later told detectives, "I saw it in his eyes, like something had cracked, like he knew the story was over, and he wasn't in it." And that's when the writing stopped. Perhaps the most chilling sign? Nick stopped writing. No new scripts, no journal entries, no emails to agents or collaborators. He went silent, and silence, in his case, was the loudest warning of all. Because for a man who believed words were his only power, stopping meant one thing. He was planning something that couldn't be rewritten. But Nick wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Because while he simmered in the shadows of the guest house, someone else had been watching, documenting, recording, and what they captured would become the key to everything. How do you hide a fractured family under a perfect Hollywood spotlight? Answer: very carefully and with powerful connections. From the outside, the Reiners were the American dream in motion: wealth, talent, recognition, a mansion in Brentwood, and an aura of quiet class. Rob Reiner was a beloved director and actor. Michelle Singer, the calm in the storm. Romy, the witty, modern daughter stepping into the entertainment world with grace. But what no one saw, what no camera ever captured, was what simmered just beneath that polished veneer. This wasn't a happy family. This was a house divided. And at the center of it all was Nick, the public illusion. Scroll through old interviews with Rob Reiner, and you'll see the same thing over and over. He talks about his career, his views on politics, his legacy, and occasionally, Romy. But Nick? He's a ghost in the narrative, rarely mentioned, almost never celebrated. And when he was brought up, it was with vague references like, "My son's doing his own thing. He's a writer too. He's creative, but private." The truth? Rob and Nick hadn't had a real conversation in years. They communicated through notes, emails, once, allegedly, through the family dog, Nick refusing to speak unless the dog was in the room. Insiders called it the invisible wall. But make no mistake, everyone in the house felt it. And over time, the tension became toxic. The panic room incident. It happened in 2018. Never reported, never confirmed, but whispered about by a former housekeeper, now in witness protection. Nick had been arguing with Rob over money. Specifically, access to a trust fund Rob had frozen. According to the housekeeper, the shouting escalated until Rob slammed the study door shut. Nick, furious, grabbed a kitchen knife. Michelle, fearing the worst, activated the home's panic protocol, a hidden security system designed for home invasions. She and Rob locked themselves inside the reinforced master bedroom. Nick banged on the door for 10 minutes, then disappeared into the backyard. By the time security arrived, Nick was in the guest house, pretending to sleep. Nothing was done. No police were called. Because for the Reiners, as with many elite families, image came first. An unspoken agreement. After the panic room incident, things changed. Michelle began taking new precautions, changed alarm codes, installed a lock on the kitchen drawer containing knives, asked a private security consultant to assess risk within the family. Meanwhile, Rob withdrew further. He began limiting financial access to Nick, stopped reading Nick's scripts, avoided the guest house entirely. One close friend said Rob told him, "It's like there's a stranger on our property, but he has my face." And Romy? She distanced herself too, but not before making one final attempt to reconnect. The letter that backfired. In 2022, Romy wrote Nick a personal letter, handwritten, heartfelt, and left on his guest house porch. It was an olive branch. She invited him to dinner, apologized for the past, said she missed her brother. Nick never responded, but he did leave something in the mailbox of the main house the next morning. A single sentence, scrawled in red ink on the back of the letter. "You only miss me when you need someone to blame." After that, Romy told a family friend, "That was the day I realized, my brother's not coming back. Whoever he used to be, he's gone." The dinner that changed everything. In late 2023, Rob and Michelle tried one last time. They invited Nick to a family dinner, small, private, just the four of them. He accepted. For the first 20 minutes, things were quiet. Nick barely spoke. Romy tried making conversation. Michelle served his favorite dish. Then, according to a sworn statement by Romy, he looked up at Dad and said, "So, how much do I get when you die?" The table fell silent. Rob asked him to leave. Nick didn't argue. He stood up, placed his fork down, and said, "Don't worry. I won't have to wait long." Michelle was in tears. Romy was frozen. Rob never invited him over again. Recording devices and a shattered illusion. Sometime in early 2024, Michelle, now deeply concerned for their safety, installed hidden recording devices in 3 parts of the house: the foyer, the hallway outside the study, the patio near the guest house walkway. She told a close friend, "I'm not trying to spy. I'm trying to survive." What those recordings captured in the months before the murders would later become crucial evidence in the case. Snippets included Nick pacing the garden late at night, muttering to himself, "They'll see. They'll all see." An argument with Rob, one of the few recorded, where Rob says, "You're not entitled to anything just because you're angry." Michelle crying on the patio, whispering into her phone, "I don't know how much longer I can live like this." None of this was ever meant for the public. But in court, these recordings shattered the illusion of the Reiner family once and for all. Behind the smiles, red carpet clues. In hindsight, even the public appearances told a story if you knew where to look. At the When Harry Met Sally anniversary event in 2019, Rob smiled for cameras. Romy was there. Michelle stood beside him. Nick? Absent. At the Stand By Me screening that same year, Romy and Rob posed for a father-daughter portrait. Behind them, someone snapped a candid shot. Nick, standing near the parking lot, looking on with an unreadable expression. That photo would later go viral. Captioned, "The Shadow of the Reiner Legacy. Therapists, Threats, and Throne Glass." According to court documents obtained after Nick's arrest, at least 2 family therapists filed reports about concerns of escalating violence. In one session, Nick allegedly threw a glass against the wall when Rob refused to apologize for emotional abandonment. Another time, Nick stormed out yelling, "You'll wish I disappeared when you had the chance." The therapists encouraged separation, but Rob and Michelle held on. Michelle, especially, reportedly believed, "He's not evil. He's just lost. If we give up on him, what's left?" That question now feels like a prophecy. But just when the family thought it couldn't get worse, Nick discovered something. A document. A conversation overheard. A moment not yet made public. Something that confirmed his worst fear. He was being erased from the will, the family, and the legacy. And that revelation? That was the final match. The flame that turned family tension into tragedy. What really happened during the hours when the house went silent? That's the question that refuses to go away. Because December 14th didn't begin as a nightmare. It didn't announce itself with sirens or screams. It arrived quietly, almost politely. And that's what makes it so disturbing. What unfolded that night wasn't chaos from the start. It was routine, familiar, domestic, until it wasn't. 7:12 p.m. Everything seems normal. According to the reconstructed timeline, the evening began without drama. Dinner was prepared. Lights were on. The house was alive. Michelle was in the kitchen, moving slowly, deliberately. Rob was in his study, reviewing notes, occasionally stepping out to check on her. Romy wasn't there that night, a detail that would later haunt everyone involved. And Nick? Nick was in the guest house, watching, waiting. Security footage from the exterior cameras shows him pacing near the back patio around this time. Hands in pockets, head down, back and forth, back and forth. No phone, no headphones, no distractions, just movement. 8:03 p.m., the first shift. This is when investigators say the tone of the night changed. A motion sensor near the garden pathway triggered, not unusual on its own. But what caught analysts' attention was the duration. Nick didn't just pass through. He lingered. Nearly 8 minutes. Long enough to suggest hesitation. Or deliberation. Was he building up courage? Or fighting something inside himself? That question matters more than you might think. Because from this point on, the timeline stops being about minutes and starts being about intent. 8:26 p.m., the argument no one heard. There's no audio recording of what happened next. But there is circumstantial evidence. And it paints a chilling picture. Rob's study light flicks on at 8:26 p.m. At 8:27, Michelle's phone unlocks, then locks again, as if interrupted. At 8:29, a neighbor's security camera picks up muffled voices. Raised. Emotional. But not screaming. This wasn't a sudden explosion. This was something simmering, finally boiling over. Investigators believe Nick entered the main house during this window. Quietly. Using a door he'd used 1,000 times before. No forced entry. No alarms triggered. Because he didn't need to break in. He belonged there. 8:41 p.m. The kitchen drawer. One of the most chilling details in the case is also one of the smallest. At 8:41 p.m., the smart lock on the kitchen knife drawer was manually overridden. Only 2 people knew how to do that. Rob and Michelle. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Did someone ask them to open it? Or did someone force them to? Investigators believe Michelle may have been in the kitchen at the time. That she may have sensed danger. That she may have tried to de-escalate. And if that's true, then what happened next wasn't just violence. It was betrayal. 8:49 p.m., the study. This is where the timeline fractures. Forensic analysis places the first fatal encounter in the study. Furniture was disturbed. A lamp overturned. A chair pushed back violently. No signs of a prolonged struggle, but signs of resistance. Michelle is believed to have been attacked first. Not because she was weaker, but because she was closest. And because she may have stood between Rob and Nick. That detail matters. Because it suggests something deeply human and deeply tragic. A mother trying to protect her family. 9:02 p.m. Rob hears everything. This is the moment investigators say Rob likely realized something was horribly wrong. Footsteps on the stairs. A door opening. A voice calling out. The position where Rob was found suggests he moved toward the hallway, not away from it. He didn't run. He went toward the danger. Why? Was it instinct? Denial? Love? Or was it the final act of a father who believed he could still stop what was happening? Whatever the reason, this was the moment the night became irreversible. 9:07 p.m., silence. No more movement detected inside the house for nearly an hour. No calls. No alarms. No lights switching on or off. Just stillness. That's one of the most unsettling parts of the timeline. Because silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's aftermath. 10:01 p.m., the guest house light. At exactly 10:01 p.m., The exterior camera shows the guest house light turning on. Nick returns. Alone. He doesn't run. He doesn't rush. He walks. Casually. As if nothing extraordinary has happened. That image, calm footsteps after catastrophic violence, is one investigators say they will never forget. 10:19 p.m., the cleanup that wasn't. This is where the story takes another dark turn. Evidence suggests Nick attempted to clean himself, not the scene. Water was found in the guest house sink. Clothing discarded, but not thoroughly washed. Hands wiped, but not treated. It's almost as if he didn't care, or didn't believe he'd be questioned, or believed the story was already written. And that belief, it might explain everything. 11:34 p.m., the message that was never sent. Investigators later recovered a draft message on Nick's phone. Never sent, never deleted, just sitting there. It read, "You finally see me now." No recipient, no context, just those 5 words. And the timestamp? 11:34 p.m., long after the house had gone quiet. But here's the twist no one expected. According to the digital forensic team, Nick's phone wasn't the only one active that night. At 8:52 p.m., right in the middle of the timeline, Michelle's phone recorded a 14-second voice memo. It's distorted, barely audible, but one phrase is clear. A whisper. Shaking. Urgent. Please don't. That recording changes everything. Because it suggests awareness. Fear. And a final attempt to stop what was coming. And that brings us to the question no one wants to ask. If the warning signs were there, if the fear was real, if the danger was known, why didn't anyone intervene sooner? Why was Nick still living there? Why did this family wait until it was too late? And most haunting of all, was December 14th inevitable or preventable? Because what investigators uncover next will suggest something even darker, something that points not just to rage, but to planning. And when that evidence comes to light, the entire case will shift. Was it a crime of passion or a calculated act born from resentment and entitlement? That question haunted the homicide unit. Because the deeper detectives dug, the less it looked like a sudden explosion and more like a performance. A carefully staged act by a man who knew exactly how this would play out. Nick Reiner wasn't a stranger to the criminal justice system. He wasn't naive. And he wasn't sloppy. Not in the way people first assumed. No, he was theatrical, symbolic, almost cinematic in his choices. And the clues he left behind? They weren't mistakes. They were statements. 1:13 a.m., a strange discovery in the garden. At this exact time, security footage picked up a flicker of light in the garden. Investigators initially dismissed it as a sensor malfunction. But when they checked the area, they found something chilling. Buried beneath a loose patch of soil, wrapped in a black t-shirt, was a copy of a screenplay. Printed, bound, annotated in red ink. Title: Inheritance. Written by Nick Reiner. Inside, the main character murders his family after discovering he's been cut from the will. Sound familiar? Even the crime scene description in the script matched elements of what had occurred. The mother stabbed in the study. The father found near the stairs. A kitchen knife. Silence. And most haunting? A line from the final scene, scribbled in the margins. This isn't revenge. It's reclamation. The forensics confirm it. Blood spatter analysis showed distinct patterns that didn't align with random struggle. The injuries weren't wild. They were targeted, clean, intentional. The medical examiner's report stated, the wounds indicate someone familiar with where to strike. The neck, the ribs, the back. These weren't rage-driven blows. They were methodical. This wasn't someone losing control. This was someone in control, executing a plan, step by step. Which leads us to one of the most terrifying details of the night. 2:17 a.m., the moment Nick crossed the line for good. Security footage, analyzed frame by frame, showed Nick returning from the garden. He walked straight into the guest house. Lights off. Silent. Then, 5 minutes later, the door opened again. Nick walked to the patio, stared at the main house, and then he smiled. That single frame, captured in the low glow of the garden lights, became the photo used in the LAPD's internal case files. They called it the moment of no return. Because that smile, faint, crooked, almost smug, told them what they needed to know. He wasn't sorry. He was satisfied. 3:04 a.m., the deleted message. Investigators retrieved phone logs that showed Nick opened a messaging app at 3:04 a.m. He typed a message, deleted it, typed another, deleted it again. This repeated 5 times. The final version of the unsent message. I didn't want it to end like this. But you wouldn't listen. Again, no recipient. But many believe it was meant for Rob. Or Romy. Or both. It was never sent. Because Nick knew by morning, the message would be loud enough without words. 4:12 a.m. A flash of movement. And a knife goes missing. This is the last movement recorded before sunrise. Nick is seen in a hoodie, walking behind the tool shed. He's holding something. Possibly metallic. When police searched that area later, they found disturbed soil. No knife. But the canine unit picked up a scent, and buried 6 inches below the surface was an empty sheath. From the family's kitchen set. The matching knife? Missing. Presumed to be the murder weapon. Presumed to be in Nick's possession, until later that day, when police would find it beneath a panel in the guest house floorboards. Wrapped in tape. Wiped clean, but with one flaw. A partial thumbprint. Nick's. 6:20 a.m. The first attempt at cover-up. Between 6 o'clock and 6:30 a.m., Nick accessed a secure folder on his laptop. The contents? A scanned copy of Rob's old will from 2019, before Nick was disinherited. A typed letter addressed, to whom it may concern, attempting to position Nick as mentally unwell and not legally responsible for his actions. A file titled, Statement Draft for LAPD. It began with, I didn't mean to do it. I blacked out. I was off my meds. I just wanted to talk. But none of those were sent, printed, or presented. Because by then, the plan had changed. The performance was over. And the curtain was about to rise on the final act, exposure. 10:32 a.m. Romy walks into the house. This is where it comes full circle. We already know what Romy saw. What she felt. How she screamed. But what she didn't realize, until hours later, was that she was never supposed to be there that morning. Nick didn't expect her, didn't account for her. She was the variable. And that variable is what cracked the case open. Because Romy knew the house better than anyone. She knew what was off. She knew what to look for. And she saw the one thing that investigators would have missed. A small smear of blood on the study's thermostat panel, right next to a button labeled Safe Access. That detail led officers to the false wall. And behind that, Rob's final will, his last warning, and the sealed letters that would change the entire investigation. But why did Nick stay? Why didn't he run? Why didn't he cover his tracks? Why didn't he vanish into the Hollywood Hills, or hop on a flight, or even pretend to discover the bodies with Romy? That, perhaps, is the darkest question of all. Because some believe he stayed. Because he wanted to see the reaction. He wanted to be there when it broke. To hear the sirens. To see the looks on their faces. To watch the world finally see him. Not as a shadow. Not as a forgotten son. But as the center of the story. The author of the ending. The final image of that night. At 10:53 a.m., body cam footage captures Nick as he's being led away. No resistance. No emotion. Just one glance. Back at the house. Not at his parents. Not at the pool. Or the garden. At the study window. The place where he used to wait for Rob to emerge with praise. With validation. With love. And as the cruiser door closes behind him, he whispers, almost inaudibly, "You never saw me coming." But someone did. Because as Nick sat in that cruiser, handcuffed and silent, a detective reviewed the contents of Rob's letter. And there, scrawled in Rob's handwriting, underlined twice, were 6 words. If I'm dead, start with Nick. And they did. But what they found next, that wasn't just about Nick. It was about the entire Reiner legacy. And the secrets that no one saw coming. What kind of sister tells police her own brother should be the prime suspect, before anyone else even asks? That question sat heavy in the interrogation room. Not because it sounded accusatory, but because it sounded certain. Romy Reiner wasn't speculating. She wasn't emotional rambling. She wasn't looking for someone to blame. She was warning them. And according to detectives, she'd been doing it for years. The first interview, calm, not shocked. Romy's initial statement lasted nearly 3 hours. What stunned investigators wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. No hysterics. No confusion. No denial. Just a steady voice and a sentence that would echo through the entire case. You're going to think this sounds horrible, but I've been afraid this would happen. That's not how grief usually speaks. That's how anticipation does. I love him, but I'm scared of him. Romy didn't start with the night of the murders. She started years earlier. She told detectives she'd spent most of her life managing two versions of her brother. The one the world never saw, quiet, withdrawn, awkward, and the one the family lived with, volatile, resentful, unpredictable. She described moments that seemed small at the time, but now felt enormous in hindsight. Nick slamming doors so hard the walls shook. Nick staring at her during dinner, silent, jaw clenched. Nick asking questions that felt wrong. Questions like, do you ever wonder what happens when parents die suddenly? Who do you think they'd believe if something went wrong? Do you think people are born bad or made that way? Romy told detectives. At first, I thought he was just being dramatic. Then I realized he was rehearsing the sentence she couldn't forget. There was one moment Romy returned to again and again during questioning. It happened 2 years before the murders. She and Nick were alone on the back patio. Late evening. No parents around. They'd been arguing about money, about attention, about the past. And that's when Nick said it. Not yelling, not threatening, just stating it. One day, they're going to push me too far. And when that happens, no one will be able to stop me. Romy laughed it off at the time. Nervous laughter. Defensive laughter. But Nick didn't smile. He just looked at her and added, I hope you're not there when it happens. She told detectives that sentence never left her. Not once. The journal Romy never wanted to show anyone. 3 months before the murders, Romy started keeping a private journal. Not a diary. A record. She didn't tell her parents. Didn't tell friends. She wrote down dates. Comments. Behaviors. Why? Because she was afraid that if something happened, no one would believe her unless she had proof. In one entry, dated just weeks before December 14th, she wrote, I'm scared to leave them alone with him. I know how insane that sounds, but it feels like waiting for something awful. Another entry, even more chilling. He talks about endings a lot lately. About who gets remembered. About who deserves what. I don't think he's joking. That journal would later be entered into evidence, and it would fundamentally change how prosecutors framed the case. The warning that went ignored. Romy told police she tried to warn her parents. More than once. She told Michelle she was worried. That Nick's behavior was escalating. That the tension felt different, sharper, heavier. Michelle listened. But she didn't act. Not because she didn't believe Romy, but because she didn't want to accept what belief would mean. Romy recalled Michelle saying, if we treat him like a monster, that's what he'll become. Rob, according to Romy, was more distant. He didn't dismiss her fears, but he didn't confront them either. He retreated into paperwork. Lawyers. The will. Romy now believes the will wasn't just about money. It was about control, about safety, and about something Rob couldn't say out loud. The night before the murders. This detail stopped detectives cold. Romy told them she spoke to Nick the night before December 14th. A short call. Less than 2 minutes. Nick sounded calm. Too calm. He asked where she was staying. What time she'd be coming by the next day. Then he said, if you love them, don't come early. At the time, she didn't understand what he meant. Now, she understands all of it. Why Romy told police to check the guest house. When officers asked her why she immediately pointed them toward Nick, her answer was simple. Because nothing about this surprised me. She didn't say that with anger. She said it with grief. The kind of grief that comes from knowing something terrible is coming and being powerless to stop it. She told detectives, I kept thinking, if I just stay quiet, maybe it won't happen. Maybe I'm overreacting. I didn't want to destroy my family with accusations. Pause. Then she added, I didn't realize staying quiet might destroy it anyway. The guilt that haunts her. Romy admitted something that made even seasoned investigators uncomfortable. Part of her believed, even now, that if she had pushed harder, if she had forced the issue, if she had demanded police intervention earlier, her parents might still be alive. That belief sits heavy on her. It shapes every sentence she speaks. She told detectives, I feel like I failed them. But I also feel like they failed to hear me. That contradiction, love mixed with resentment, guilt mixed with clarity, defines Romy's role in this story. She wasn't a bystander. She was a witness, trapped inside the family. The sentence that became the chapter title. Toward the end of the interview, a detective asked her a blunt question. When did you first think your brother could actually kill someone? Romy didn't answer right away. She stared at the table. Then she said, The day I realized he stopped seeing them as people and started seeing them as obstacles. She paused, and then she added, quietly, that's when I knew. One day he'd kill them. That sentence would later be quoted, leaked, actually, and explode across headlines. But what the public never saw was what came after. Romy breaking down, sobbing, repeating the same words again and again. I didn't want to be right. But there was one more thing Romy hadn't told anyone. Not her parents. Not her friends. Not even police, at first. Something she'd discovered accidentally. Something that suggested Nick hadn't just been talking about violence. He'd been preparing for it. And when she finally revealed that detail, the entire case took a darker turn. Because it meant December 14th wasn't just foreseeable. It was planned. What kind of man hides his will inside a wall, unless he's afraid of the people living in his own house? That's the question that hit investigators the moment the false panel slid open. Because wills aren't hidden like that. Cash gets hidden. Weapons get hidden. Secrets get hidden. But a will? A will gets filed, registered, logged, safe. Unless the person writing it believes the greatest threat isn't strangers, but family. The discovery no one was supposed to make. The false wall wasn't obvious. It was disguised behind a custom-built bookshelf in Rob's study, the kind of craftsmanship only someone deeply intentional would commission. No handles, no seams, no visible locks, just a slight misalignment in the grain that only stood out when Romy pointed to it and said, Dad used to stand there when he was thinking. That comment stopped detectives in their tracks. They pressed. The panel shifted. Behind it sat a fireproof safe, bolted into the studs. Not hidden to protect valuables from burglars. Hidden to protect the truth from someone inside the house. Inside the safe, the contents were meticulously organized. No clutter. No confusion. Just folders. Labels. Dates. This wasn't a man in panic. This was a man preparing for something he believed was inevitable. Inside the safe, a sealed, notarized will dated 6 months earlier. 3 handwritten letters. Copies of restraining order drafts, never filed. A folder labeled Nick. Document everything. And one final envelope marked in all caps. Open only if something happens to us. That last envelope changed the entire investigation. The will that cut a son out completely. The will was clear. Brutally clear. Romy was the sole heir. The estate. The intellectual property. The trusts. The rights. Everything. Nick's name appeared exactly once. And when it did, it was followed by language no one expected to read in a parent's final testament. Nick Reiner is to receive nothing, under any circumstances. This decision is intentional, permanent, and based on concerns for the safety of others. That line alone stunned the probate attorney who reviewed it. But Rob didn't stop there. He added a personal clause, something most lawyers advise against. Because it wasn't legal language. It was emotional truth. I love my son. But love does not mean denial. Nick cannot be trusted with power, money, or control. I fear what he may do if given either. That wasn't anger. That was fear. Why hide it? That question haunted everyone. Why not file the will publicly? Why not tell Nick? Why not involve police? The answer became clearer as detectives moved through the rest of the safe. Draft restraining orders, and signed. Emails to lawyers asking about emergency guardianship protections. Notes in Rob's handwriting that read like reminders to himself. Don't provoke him. Stay calm. Michelle first. Romy safe. This wasn't a man trying to punish his son. This was a man trying to survive him. The second letter, a father's confession. The first handwritten letter was addressed to Romy. It was tender, apologetic, raw. Rob wrote that he was sorry for putting her in the middle. Sorry for asking her to be strong when she shouldn't have had to be. He told her, "You see things more clearly than I do. I should have listened sooner." That sentence broke her. Detectives noted she stopped reading at that point and had to step outside. But the next letter? That one wasn't written for comfort. It was written for the truth. The letter to law enforcement. This letter was addressed simply, to whoever finds this. Rob didn't hedge his words. He didn't soften his concerns. He didn't protect anyone's reputation. He wrote, "If something violent has occurred in this house, please understand this. I have lived in fear of my own son." This is not an accusation made lightly. It is the result of years of escalating behavior, threats, and instability. He went on to describe incidents that had never been reported. Objects thrown, doors kicked in, Verbal threats made in calm voices. The most chilling line? He does not lose control. He chooses when to unleash it. That sentence alone reframed the entire case.